Right. This is one of the symptoms of fiat money disease. You completely lose the ability of using the English language in an intelligent way. I'm sure if Steve Hanke was covering the Hindenburg disaster, at their burst into flames, he'd be saying, look at those people at the Hindenburg, they're winning, right? Because all of those people who are trying to cover El Salvador and use the metrics of how they've been analyzing global economy up until now are befuddled. They don't know exactly how to cover the fact that the economy is actually growing and GDP is growing, and they're the bright spot in the global economy. And unlike every other country in the world, tourism is back to pre-pandemic levels, and these things are happening in a positive way because of total lack of understanding of how to even use English language. Forget about this guy's credentials as an economist. He's not even actually able to put together two sentences that are in a coherent manner. He should be locked up in a rubber room. Right, well, with that US dollar came the exportation of gangs into El Salvador, and you had the rise of gang violence. So Steve Hanke, I believe, would think that that's a positive thing. Apparently, he thinks that all kinds of homicides happening on a daily basis is great, according to Steve Hanke, and that the fact that this tide has turned on that is a failure. Again, total misunderstanding of how the English language works. Typically, if you have an eradication of violence that was, exported to your country from dollar-denominated colonial interests coming from the north, you would be happy and that would be a success. But according to Steve Hanke, that's a failure. So again, you'd have to question how this guy got into whatever university he got into, because apparently he can't string together two sentences. Right, well, whenever you can get away with the decadence of reinventing the meaning of words on the fly to suit a political agenda, it's because of those who control the money printing are totally autocratically controlling the economy. So what we have in the United States and other countries around the world where central banks are in power is authoritarianism. So it's authoritarianism by the money printer. Here in El Salvador, it's the complete opposite. There's the rise of a meritocracy where there is no money printer. There's a Bitcoin is legal tender, and people are left to their own devices to be entrepreneurially excellent and to come up with ways to improve their lives and their family lives. And the results are on the ground. You can see it. It's palpable. And everybody is having really a spring, in the Salvadoran spring that's becoming a model for the region and a model for the world, all because of what Steve Hanke would call a failure. So again, because he's associated with the money printers, because he's in league with the money printers, he's forced, essentially he's coercing his readers into believing the unbelievable. And because it's propaganda. Let's be honest, Steve Hanke is a propagandist. Right, the Truman Show of having world reserve currency dollar create the hologram of American success has been punctured on February of 2022. And now we're in a post-fiat money world. Well, let's talk more about this after the break. This is fascinating stuff. Don't go away. Land of the free, home of the Bitcoin. Stacy. Steve Hanke is gaslighting the world by writing words that make no sense in a National Review or some magazine that supposedly has some reputation. And people read it and they get confused. And that's what the point is, to confuse people. And once you confuse people, you can feed them a lot more lies. There's clearly a lie. I mean, he's been doing this for years. He's one of 3 or 4 journalists that you can hire to write gaslighting nonsense in these periodicals. And but it's clearly the history. He's on the wrong side of history because everything in El Salvador is picking up. And it's all proving him to be horribly wrong. And then someday he'll retire and nobody will think about him anymore. He'll take his paycheck. He'll be on the beach for the rest of his days, and nobody will remember this propagandist named Steve Hanke. Well, let me explain this in terms of the board game Monopoly, which everybody understands and played for many years. And on February 24th of 2022, something happened in the global Monopoly game. Up until then, it was, the US dollar was a world reserve bank, just like a Monopoly. They had one bank, it's all the money. And people were buying and selling properties on this Monopoly board, and everyone was participating, and we had some winners and losers. But on February 24th of 2024, what happened is that there's a couple of squares on the Monopoly board called utilities. And if you land on those squares, you have to pay your utility bill. So what Russia did was, you know what, if you land on our utility square, we're going to charge you about 50,000 times more than is in the rule book that you are currently playing Monopoly under. And this poor woman in Leicester, who has a coffee shop where she sells Marmite smeared all over, bundies or biddies, bacon biddies and fry sandwiches, chip sandwiches, she's suddenly getting the new Monopoly board game that says if you land on the utility bill, that is your energy bill, you're going to have to pay, 5,000 times higher, because that's the new game, the new Monopoly board. And if you never got the memo, it doesn't matter, because you are a winner by paying all that into money that goes into, by the way, Electricity of France, EDF, which owns all the utilities in the UK, by giving France all of your hard-earned money over there at the crisp shop and the chip shop and the flaky fish and chip shop. You're winning. You're winning by losing. You're winning by going broke. You're winning because you're at the food bank. You're winning because you're living on Marmite. You're winning. Don't you get it? But in the UK suffering under high energy bills, and Steve Hanke claims that you're winning. What you should do is get naked, rub Marmite all over your body, and Steve Hanke will come and lick it off. Now that's winning. That's winning. Wiener Schnitzel. Yeah, that's the thing, is that the Monopoly board has been reconfigured. The rules have changed. The US dollar dominating the global economy is no longer the case. Countries are doing bilateral trade in currencies outside of the US dollar. And you've got supply lines breaking, and you've got politicians in Europe and the UK and America who are ignoring the fact that the only possible way to stop this inflation from ravaging these economies and causing death and famine is to actually allow energy to flow from the east to the west. That's actually what winning would look like. Ultimately, there will be no choice. Ultimately, that will be the outcome. It's just a matter of how much pain you're willing to go through before that eventuality takes place, or as Steve Hanke likes to call it, winning.
Well, you bring up death and destruction. We have some headlines about that. And that is, so when we're talking about deglobalization and de-dollarization, again, we keep on stressing this. This has happened in history. Deglobalization happens every time an empire or a great power or several powers collapse, and there's a bit of chaos. And in that chaos is what we're seeing. What we're saying is throughout history, you've had periods of what Orwell would have called totalitarianism. You could call it whatever you want, but the fact is, like, words flip in meaning because, of course, the most powerful becomes the weakest becomes the most powerful. In El Salvador, which used to be in the world in which the United States and the US dollar reigned supreme, they used to be the most violent nation in the world. This August, they had their least violent, the lowest number of homicides in their modern history. Now we're going to turn to just what I'm saying, like when Steve Hanke looks at America and says they're winning and that El Salvador is losing, we'll look at a headline which is quite tragic.
Expectancy dropping in America. Steve Hanke, of course, refers to this as winning. You've got tens of thousands of people dying from OxyContin overdoses put together by the major pharmaceutical companies. Steve Hanke calls that winning. You've got major people dying from fentanyl in the street, homeless, living in their own defecation, a complete disintegration of society. According to Steve Hanke, that's winning. So yeah, they're winning. They're doing great in America. It's deaths of despair, life expectancy is collapsing, infant mortality is on the up, and the GDP is contracting, and you've got a neo-feudal, entrenched monarchy/aristocracy and oligarchy in America that's ripping people off left and right. But according to Steve Hanke, that's winning.